Imagine this. How many times have you looked at your life and wondered why certain things have happened the way they did? Maybe you felt a bit lost, unable to understand the reason behind some of life's difficulties, or perhaps even the good moments that seemed random or unexpected. Have you ever felt as if the pieces of your life just aren't fitting together? Well, if you're here today, it's no accident. God has a message for you, a message so powerful that it could completely change how you see every single detail of your life, because nothing is a coincidence. Everything happens for a reason, and it's all part of God's perfect plan. So imagine that every challenge you've faced, every tear you've shed, and every unexpected blessing you've received have all been part of a greater purpose, guiding you towards something incredible. Every hardship, every twist in the road, and every joyful surprise was intentionally placed in your life to prepare you, to teach you, and to lead you toward a plan that only God knows. If you've ever felt alone, or like your life's challenges seem to be piling up, this video is exactly for you. We'll explore how each step, each closed door, and each new direction has a powerful purpose designed by God. This purpose, while sometimes hidden, brings peace, hope, and direction. In the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29, verse 11, God speaks to this exact truth, saying, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." This message isn't just for you. It's for everyone who might feel discouraged, confused, or just plain tired of trying to make sense of their own life. So as you watch, if you feel that God is speaking to you, I invite you to become part of this community by subscribing to this channel. Your support doesn't just bring encouragement to you, it helps us reach others who need to hear this message too. Imagine how many people are struggling right now, feeling lost or hopeless, and could be transformed by hearing that their life has meaning, that every challenge has a purpose, and that every tear they've cried is seen by God. Together, we can help bring this message of hope and purpose to countless lives. So go ahead and subscribe, like this video, and join us in spreading this truth. Because each time you share, comment, and like, you're helping someone else find hope and purpose. Let's make this community one that uplifts, encourages, and reminds everyone that God's perfect plan is working in each of our lives. Let's begin. Number 1. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 21. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. How often do we map out our lives, creating detailed plans, only to watch things unfold in an entirely different way? Maybe you had a goal that seemed achievable, a dream you were passionate about, or a path you felt sure about, only to encounter unexpected obstacles and setbacks. This verse serves as a powerful reminder. We may have many plans, but it is ultimately God's purpose that prevails. And while we may not always understand why things happen the way they do, His purpose is far better than any outcome we could envision for ourselves. Proverbs 19:21 teaches us that our hearts are often filled with our own dreams, goals, and ambitions, yet it is God who knows the full picture. Unlike us, He sees every angle, knows every detail, and understands our true needs. Imagine if you had access to the entire blueprint of your life, every turn, every challenge, every moment of joy. It would be overwhelming, but it's also likely that we wouldn't understand how everything fits together. What we believe we want or need may not be what brings us closer to God's purpose. Consider a scenario where you've been pursuing a specific job, something you've worked hard for and genuinely wanted. When the time comes, someone else gets it, and you're left feeling frustrated, maybe even resentful. But later on, as new and better doors open for you, you start to see that God was guiding you all along towards something that aligned perfectly with His purpose for your life. In that moment, you realize that if you had received what you initially wanted, you might have missed out on an opportunity that God had carefully prepared just for you. This is the beauty of divine purpose. God sees our desires and ambitions, but he also sees the hidden pitfalls and potential dangers that we can't see. He knows exactly what is needed to develop our faith, to shape our character, and to fulfill the unique calling he has placed on our lives. Every closed door, every no, and every detour we encounter is often a part of his plan to bring us to something greater. The next time you're feeling uncertain or discouraged about your journey, remember this verse. Perhaps you have plans and dreams that seem delayed or redirected. During those times, turn to God in prayer. Ask for his guidance, and most importantly, allow him to lead you. It doesn't mean you have to give up on your dreams, but it does mean entrusting each one to him, knowing that if it's truly right, God will open the door in his perfect timing. Reflect for a moment. Have you ever experienced a time when your plans seemed perfect, but things didn't go as expected? What did you feel when your dreams didn't come to fruition? Think about sharing your story to encourage someone else who might be going through something similar. Living with trust in God means surrendering to his timing and understanding that his plans are always better than our own. In the book of Jeremiah, chapter 33, verse 3, God tells us, "Call to me and I will answer you and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know." This verse reminds us that his wisdom and his plan extend far beyond anything we could imagine. When we seek him with humility, he will reveal his path to us in his perfect time. And here's something truly profound. Every time we let go of our own desires and say, "God, your will be done, not mine," we're opening ourselves to a divine principle that brings peace and purpose. We align ourselves with the Lord's purpose and let him work in our lives in ways we could never achieve on our own. So when you find that things don't go as planned, don't lose hope. Remember that while we may have many plans in our hearts, it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. And his purpose is always, without fail, for our ultimate good. Number 2, Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. This verse from Romans contains one of the most comforting promises in the Bible. It reminds us that God is actively working through every circumstance in our lives, using both the good and the bad for a purpose that ultimately serves our best interests. This doesn't mean that life will be free from challenges, but it does mean that we can trust that everything we face is part of a greater plan. When Paul says, "in all things," he means everything: our struggles, our victories, our pain, and our joy. Perhaps you're going through a situation right now that feels overwhelming, something dark or painful that you can't make sense of. But when we understand that God is at work even in these trials, we begin to see our lives with a new perspective. We realize that what breaks us today may be building us up for something extraordinary tomorrow. Imagine that your life is like a jigsaw puzzle. At first, all the pieces seem scattered and random, and it's hard to see how they'll ever fit together. But as you place each piece down, the picture starts to take shape. The same is true in God's plan for us. What may look like a setback or a broken piece in our eyes could actually be a critical part of a beautiful and meaningful whole that he is creating in our lives. Romans 8:28 also tells us that this promise is for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. This means that when we surrender to God and allow him to work in our lives, he takes every detail, every pain, and every joy and weaves them into something incredible. Loving God and being called to his purpose requires us to place our full trust in him, even when we don't understand the path ahead. The story of Joseph in the Old Testament is a powerful example of this. Joseph faced betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment, all painful circumstances that seemed to lead nowhere. Yet in the end, he could look back and say, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." Genesis 50:20. Joseph's life illustrates how God can take even the worst situations and use them for an amazing purpose, for his glory and our good. When we face trials, it's easy to lose heart and feel abandoned. But Romans 8:28 invites us to believe that nothing in our lives is wasted. Every moment of pain, every struggle, and every waiting period is part of God's work to shape us into the people He created us to be. By embracing this promise, we find strength to endure, knowing that our lives are in the hands of a loving Father who sees the big picture and is always working on our behalf. Reflect on this. Is there a challenge you're facing that feels too heavy, or a season of life where you're struggling to see God's purpose? This verse encourages us to hold on to hope and remember that God is at work, even in the most challenging moments. By trusting in this promise, we allow God to transform our pain into perseverance, our struggles into strength, and our uncertainties into unwavering hope. When we give God control, He can take every piece of our lives and create something far more beautiful than we could ever imagine. Number 3, Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. This passage from Isaiah invites us to embrace a profound truth. God's thoughts and ways are beyond our understanding. While we often try to make sense of everything around us, this verse reminds us that we are limited in our understanding. God, however, sees everything. His plans are on a level so high, so far-reaching, that we simply can't comprehend them fully. This truth calls us to a life of faith, trusting that His wisdom is perfect, even when life doesn't make sense. Many times, we make plans and decisions based on what we believe to be best. We map out our lives, set goals, and work hard to achieve them. But inevitably, we encounter moments when things don't go as planned. Maybe you've faced disappointment in a relationship, a job opportunity that slipped through your fingers, or a dream that felt close, but somehow just didn't happen. It's in these moments that Isaiah's words echo, God's ways are higher than ours. Imagine looking at a masterpiece painting while standing too close to see anything beyond a small section. You might see a small detail, but miss the full picture. Our lives are much like this. God, the master artist, has a complete view of our past, present, and future, while we can only see the portion immediately in front of us. What might seem like a mistake or setback to us could be part of something breathtakingly beautiful that God is creating in the long run. The story of Moses offers a profound example of this truth. Raised as a prince in Egypt, Moses' life took an unexpected turn when he fled to the desert after killing an Egyptian who was mistreating a Hebrew. What could have looked like the end of his purpose turned out to be the beginning of his calling. Moses spent years in the wilderness, likely feeling lost and disconnected from his purpose. But God was working behind the scenes, shaping him, teaching him, and preparing him to become the deliverer of Israel. Later, when he returned to Egypt, Moses was equipped to lead the Israelites to freedom. What Moses couldn't understand in the wilderness was clear in hindsight. God had a higher plan. This is a reminder to us that sometimes what we interpret as setbacks or confusion are actually parts of God's preparation process for something far greater. God's ways are higher, and while we may not understand everything, we can trust that He is leading us with perfect wisdom and love. His timing may not match our desires, but it is always perfect, and His plans are always good. When life doesn't make sense or when we're left with unanswered questions, this verse reminds us that we don't have to understand everything to have peace. We just need to trust that God does. We are called to let go of the need to control every outcome and instead surrender to His divine plan. It's not about ignoring our desires or goals, but about trusting God's wisdom above our own and allowing Him to guide us. Think about a time when you faced a situation that seemed confusing or even unfair. Maybe now, with time, you see that it led you to a place of growth or strength. God's thoughts and ways often only become clear when we look back and see how each twist and turn was a part of His divine purpose for our lives. Isaiah 55, 8-9 is an invitation to live with humility and faith, embracing that we are not called to have all the answers, but to trust in the one who does. We may not see the full picture right now, but God does. And in His hands, everything has a purpose and a place. So, the next time you're struggling to understand why something is happening or not happening, remember that God's ways are infinitely higher than ours. His thoughts are beyond anything we can comprehend. Trust in His wisdom, lean on His love, and know that He is working things out for a purpose greater than we could ever imagine. Number 4. Psalm chapter 37, verses 4 and 5. Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him, and He will act. These verses from Psalm 37 reveal a powerful promise about the connection between our desires and God's purpose for our lives. Here, King David shows us that when we center our lives around God, placing our joy in Him, something incredible happens. Our hearts start to align with His will, and the desires we hold become those that God Himself has placed within us. To delight in the Lord means to find our greatest joy and satisfaction in knowing and pursuing Him. It's a call to make God the primary source of our fulfillment, to focus on His goodness, His love, and His purpose. It's not merely about seeking personal happiness, it's about seeking God's heart above all. When we delight ourselves in Him, our desires transform. Our ambitions become less self-centered, our goals begin to reflect His love, and our dreams start to harmonize with His purpose for us. In this way, God is able to fulfill the true desires of our hearts because they are in line with His will. An essential part of this promise is found in the next verse. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will act. This is an invitation not only to give God our hearts, but also to entrust our plans, goals, and life's journey to Him fully. Committing our way to the Lord means entrusting our dreams, our worries, and every path we take into His hands. And when we place our full trust in God, He promises that He will act on our behalf. Consider the life of David, the author of this psalm. Though David was anointed king as a young man, his path to the throne was anything but easy. He faced intense trials, including being hunted by King Saul, enduring hardship, and experiencing betrayal. David's journey was marked by challenges that could have made him doubt God's promises. Yet he continued to place his trust in the Lord, finding joy in God even during the most trying times. And in the end, God fulfilled His promise, elevating David to the throne of Israel and blessing him abundantly. David's life serves as a reminder that God's promises come to fruition when we commit our ways to Him, even if the road is difficult. Trusting God doesn't mean that we will avoid challenges, but it does mean that we can walk through those challenges with faith, knowing that God will act in His perfect timing. When we place our lives and plans in His hands, we allow Him to lead us toward the purpose He has designed for us. The call to commit our way to the Lord and trust Him is also a challenge to release control. Often, we hold tightly to our own plans and resist surrendering fully to God. We might think we know what's best for us, but these verses remind us that true peace and fulfillment come only when we let go of control and place our trust in God's wisdom. It's about letting God have the final say in our lives and allowing His plans to become ours. Reflect for a moment. Is there an area of your life where you've struggled to trust God completely? A dream or desire that you're holding on to tightly? These verses encourage us to let go, to delight in God's presence, and to allow Him to take charge. When we do, we open ourselves up to the miraculous, to a life filled with the fullness of His blessings. Psalm 37, verses 4 and 5 is an invitation to live with open hands and an open heart, finding joy in God first and trusting that He knows the best path forward. It's a call to trust that as we let go, He will act in ways we may never have imagined. So the next time you find yourself unsure of the path ahead or feeling anxious about the future, remember to delight in the Lord, commit your ways to Him, and trust that He will act. He's faithful to those who place their trust in Him, and He knows exactly how to fulfill the deepest desires of your heart. Number 5. Jeremiah, chapter 29, verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11 is one of the Bible's most comforting promises. In this verse, God declares that He has a plan for each of us, a plan designed for our ultimate good. It's a promise that even when life feels uncertain or challenging, God is in control, orchestrating events for a future filled with hope. This verse invites us to trust Him with every part of our lives, especially when we cannot see what's coming next. This verse was spoken to the Israelites at a time when they were exiled in Babylon, far from their homeland and surrounded by difficult circumstances. They felt lost, disconnected, and uncertain about what lay ahead. In this context of despair and waiting, God, through the prophet Jeremiah, speaks directly to their hearts, reassuring them that even in this place of exile and hardship, His plan is still unfolding. He tells them that the pain they are experiencing will not be in vain, and that His ultimate plan is one of prosperity, peace, and a hopeful future. When God says, "I know the plans I have for you," He is affirming that His vision for our lives is far greater than anything we can imagine. He knows the big picture and sees every detail of our past, present, and future. While we may see only a few steps ahead, or even feel like we're stumbling in the dark, God holds the entire plan. He knows every twist and turn, and He promises that each of these moments will lead us closer to the destiny He has for us. However, this doesn't mean we will be exempt from pain or difficulty. Jeremiah 29:11 doesn't imply that life will always be easy. Rather, it assures us that even through trials, God's purpose is at work. We may encounter seasons that seem far from the hopeful future He promises. It's in these times of waiting, enduring, and uncertainty that our faith is tested and strengthened. Our trust in God's character and promises can grow most powerfully during the most challenging times. This verse is also a call to patience and faithfulness. Just as the Israelites had to wait patiently in their exile, often we too must wait on God's timing. This waiting can be difficult, especially when we don't understand why certain things happen or why certain doors remain closed. Yet, we are reminded that our waiting is not wasted. God uses these seasons to prepare us, to deepen our relationship with Him, and to mold us into people who trust Him more fully. Think of a time when you faced uncertainty about the future, when perhaps the plans you had for yourself didn't unfold the way you expected. Maybe you felt disoriented or anxious about what would come next. It is in these moments that Jeremiah 29:11 becomes a source of hope, a reminder that God is in control and that He has a plan beyond what we can see or understand. God's plans are often different from ours because He sees and understands everything. While we may prioritize comfort and ease, God sees the strength and resilience that can only be built through experience. He knows the specific path each of us needs to walk to fulfill the unique calling He has for us. The prosperity and hope He speaks of may not always come in the ways we expect, but they are promises that He is faithful to fulfill. This verse invites us to surrender our limited vision and place our full trust in God's perspective. When we do this, we experience a peace that allows us to navigate the unknown with confidence. We stop fighting for control and instead rest in the truth that our lives are securely held in God's hands. Jeremiah 29:11 assures us that regardless of our circumstances, God is not finished with us. He has a purpose that He is actively unfolding, a purpose that brings hope and peace, even when the journey feels difficult. Embrace this promise today, and let it remind you that God's plan for your life is filled with purpose, designed to prosper you, and ultimately leads to a future full of hope. Number 6. Psalm chapter 23, verse 4. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Psalm 23:4 is one of the most powerful expressions of trust and confidence in God's presence, especially during times of hardship. In this verse, David acknowledges that life includes valleys, periods of darkness, fear, and pain. He doesn't deny the reality of these valleys, but he declares a greater truth. He has nothing to fear because God is with him. The imagery of the darkest valley represents the trials we face, the moments that test our strength and faith. These could be times of loss, uncertainty, or loneliness, where it feels like light and hope are distant. However, David's response to the darkness isn't fear or despair, it's confidence. He says, "I will fear no evil," and that assurance doesn't come from his own strength, but from his faith in God's constant presence. This verse reminds us that, no matter how deep the valley may be, we are never alone. God walks through it with us. The rod and staff in this verse are symbols of God's guidance and protection. In ancient times, a shepherd used the rod to protect the sheep from predators, while the staff was used to guide and support them. In the same way, God protects and guides us in our darkest moments, providing comfort and strength when we feel weak. He is our shepherd, always attentive and caring, ready to shield us from harm and steer us back when we stray. David's journey as a shepherd himself likely shaped this perspective. He knew the struggles and dangers that sheep faced and understood the shepherd's critical role in leading and defending them. David applied this same understanding to his relationship with God, trusting that just as he had protected his sheep, God would protect and guide him. This trust gave him the courage to face giants, endure persecution, and navigate challenges with faith. For many of us, the valleys we walk through may be struggles with health, financial hardships, relationship issues, or moments when hope seems out of reach. During these times, it's easy to feel overwhelmed or even to doubt that God is near. Yet Psalm 23:4 assures us that even in the darkest places, God is beside us, offering both protection and comfort. His presence transforms the valley from a place of despair into a journey of faith and growth. When we walk with God through our valleys, we experience His faithfulness in ways that can deepen our trust in Him. The valley becomes a place where we learn to rely on Him more fully, where we can let go of fear because we know that He is in control. His guidance leads us, His protection shields us, and His presence brings a peace that doesn't depend on our circumstances. In fact, the darkest valleys often reveal God's light in the most profound ways. Consider a time when you faced a difficult season, where you felt you were walking through your own dark valley. Reflect on how God's presence brought you comfort or strength, even if the situation itself didn't change immediately. Maybe there were moments when you felt God's guidance or saw His protection in ways that helped you endure. These experiences remind us that though we may not always understand our trials, God is at work, using each moment to grow our faith and draw us closer to Him. Psalm 23:4 also invites us to replace fear with trust. David's words, "I will fear no evil," are a declaration of faith. They challenge us to shift our focus from the obstacles around us to the presence of God beside us. When we're aware of His presence, our perspective changes. We're no longer consumed by fear, but comforted by the assurance that God is leading us through. In times of trouble, remember this promise. God walks with us, not just in the easy moments, but especially in the valleys. His rod and staff, His protection and guidance are there to give us confidence and peace, even when the way forward isn't clear. This verse calls us to live with the assurance that God's presence is our greatest source of comfort, no matter what challenges we face. So, when you find yourself walking through a valley, let Psalm 23:4 be a reminder that you are not alone. God is with you, guiding, protecting, and comforting you. His presence will carry you through, turning fear into faith and despair into hope. Number 7, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. But He said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." In this verse, the Apostle Paul shares a remarkable truth about God's grace and strength. Paul had been struggling with what he describes as a thorn in the flesh, a source of weakness that he asked God to remove. But instead of taking away the struggle, God gave him an answer that speaks to all of us. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. This was God's way of reminding Paul and all of us that his strength is most fully displayed in our moments of weakness. In a world that often celebrates strength, self-reliance, and achievement, this teaching is counterintuitive. We naturally want to be strong, to appear capable, and to be free of limitations. But here, God is saying that it's precisely in our weakness that his power is most evident. When we reach the end of our abilities, when we acknowledge our limitations and turn to God, that's when his strength becomes most visible. Think of it like this. When a glass is already full, there's no room for more, but when it's empty, it can be filled. In the same way, when we come to God with humility, acknowledging our weaknesses, we create space for his power to work within us. Paul learned to see his own weaknesses as opportunities for God's grace to be demonstrated, recognizing that his shortcomings were not obstacles, but invitations for God's strength to take over. Paul's response to God's message is extraordinary. Rather than feeling discouraged about his weaknesses, he chooses to boast about them. In other words, he takes joy in the fact that his own limitations allow Christ's power to work in him even more. This mindset goes against our natural tendency to hide or be ashamed of our weaknesses, yet Paul embraces them as a reminder of his dependence on Christ. It's a powerful shift in perspective. Instead of seeing our weaknesses as things that limit us, we can see them as spaces where God's grace flows most freely. God's grace is described here as sufficient. This doesn't mean it's just enough to get by. It means that God's grace is more than enough for every need, every trial, and every moment of weakness we face. His grace sustains us, fills us, and carries us, providing exactly what we need, precisely when we need it. This grace is not something we can earn or achieve through our own strength. It's a gift given freely because of his love for us. In our own lives, we often face challenges that feel overwhelming, situations where our strength and understanding fall short. It could be a health issue, a personal failure, a relational struggle, or even a feeling of inadequacy. In these moments, God invites us to rely not on our own abilities, but on his limitless strength. It's a call to recognize that our weaknesses are not signs of defeat, but opportunities for his power to be displayed in ways we could never achieve on our own. Reflect on a time in your life when you felt weak or inadequate. Maybe it was a moment when you reached the end of your own resources, only to find that God provided the strength you needed to keep going. Or perhaps it was a time when, despite your weaknesses, you experienced God's grace carrying you through. These moments remind us that his power is not limited by our human frailties. Rather, it shines most brightly when we surrender and let him work through us. 2 Corinthians 12:9 challenges us to rethink how we view our limitations. Instead of being discouraged by them, we are invited to see them as spaces where God's power is made perfect. His grace is sufficient not only for the big moments of crisis, but for every day, every small trial, and every area where we feel we fall short. It's a promise that God's strength is always available, always sufficient, and always working on our behalf. So the next time you feel inadequate or weak, remember this verse. God's grace is enough for you, and his power is at its peak in your moments of weakness. Allow his strength to fill the gaps where you fall short, and let your life become a testament to the sufficiency of his grace. Rather than hiding your weaknesses, embrace them as reminders that God is your strength, and that his grace will always carry you through. Number 8. Philippians chapter 4, verse 13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. This well-known verse from Philippians is a powerful declaration of confidence in God's strength. Paul is not speaking of a self-generated strength or positive thinking. Rather, he's expressing his deep reliance on the strength of Christ. He recognizes that any strength he possesses comes from his connection to Jesus. This statement was made by Paul while he was in prison, facing some of the harshest conditions imaginable. Yet even in those circumstances, he declares that he can endure anything and accomplish whatever God calls him to because Christ is the source of his strength. Paul's message is not that we can achieve all our personal goals or escape every hardship without struggle. Instead, he's saying that through Christ, we are empowered to face whatever comes our way. This means that whether we are facing a time of abundance or a time of lack, whether we're struggling or succeeding, we can navigate every situation with strength because Jesus is with us. When Paul says all things, he is referring to every situation life throws at us, whether it's easy or challenging, and this includes both the highs and the lows. To understand the depth of this verse, consider the context in which Paul wrote it. In Philippians, he shares about the various challenges he has faced, including persecution, hunger, and even moments of having more than enough. He has learned through experience that his circumstances don't define him or his joy. Instead, he finds his contentment and strength in Christ. No matter what he faces, he knows that Jesus provides the power and perseverance he needs. For us, this verse is a reminder that our strength is not limited to our own capabilities. Often life presents us with obstacles that feel insurmountable, situations where our own strength, wisdom, and endurance aren't enough. But in these moments, we can find strength in Christ, who empowers us to do what we never thought possible. It's not that we avoid hardship, but that we can endure and overcome because of the one who sustains us. This assurance of strength through Christ is an invitation to face life with courage and peace. We don't have to rely solely on ourselves or fear the limitations of our own abilities. Instead, we can step forward boldly, knowing that Christ's strength within us is greater than any challenge we may face. Whether it's a personal battle, a difficult decision, a goal that seems unreachable, or a season of uncertainty, we can hold on to this promise. In Christ, we have what we need to persevere. Think about a time when you faced something that seemed beyond your abilities, something that stretched you emotionally, physically, or spiritually. Perhaps you didn't feel strong enough, but as you leaned into prayer and relied on Jesus, you found a strength that carried you through. This is the essence of Philippians 4:13. It's about discovering a power within us that comes from Jesus, a power that can take us further than we could ever go on our own. Living in this truth transforms the way we approach challenges. Instead of backing down or being overwhelmed by obstacles, we approach them with the knowledge that we don't face them alone. We are empowered by Christ, whose strength is inexhaustible. This doesn't mean life becomes easy, but it means we are equipped to overcome, not by our might, but by His. This verse is an invitation to shift our focus from our own limitations to God's unlimited power. We may feel weak, but Christ is strong. We may feel uncertain, but Christ is our assurance. When we align ourselves with His strength, we are able to endure and even thrive, no matter the circumstances. So, the next time you face a challenge that feels beyond your reach, remember Philippians 4:13. Declare with confidence, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Let this be a reminder that you are never alone, that God's strength is your strength, and that with Him you are empowered to face whatever comes your way. Trust in Him, lean on His power, and watch as His strength carries you further than you could ever imagine. Number 9. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Isaiah 40:31 is a beautiful promise that invites us to place our trust and hope in God, especially during times of exhaustion and hardship. It speaks to those moments when our strength is failing, when we feel weighed down by life's demands, and when we're unsure if we can keep going. This verse assures us that if we anchor our hope in the Lord, He will renew our strength, enabling us to face every challenge with endurance and resilience. The phrase, "hope in the Lord," carries a deep meaning. It's not just about wishing for something good to happen or passively waiting for change. It's an active, intentional trust in God's faithfulness and His promises. Hoping in the Lord means choosing to rely on Him, even when circumstances seem impossible. It's a confident expectation that God is in control, that His timing is perfect, and that He knows exactly what we need. When we place our hope in Him, we are essentially saying, God, I trust you to take care of this. I believe that you are greater than my struggles, and I am depending on you to guide me through. Isaiah describes the strength God provides with powerful imagery. They will soar on wings like eagles. The eagle is a majestic bird known for its ability to soar high above the earth, gliding effortlessly on the wind currents. Eagles don't rely solely on their own strength to stay airborne. They wait for thermal updrafts, using the wind to lift them higher with little effort. In the same way, when we trust in God, we don't have to rely on our own limited strength. Instead, He lifts us, providing the energy and endurance we need to rise above our circumstances. This is a beautiful metaphor for what it means to live in the strength of the Lord, rather than relying solely on our own abilities. The verse continues with two more promises. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Running without growing weary and walking without fainting speak to a supernatural endurance that only God can provide. Life often feels like a long journey with stretches that require a steady, patient pace, and other times when we're called to sprint toward a goal or endure a high-stakes season. In either case, God promises that He will sustain us, giving us the strength we need for each step. Think about a time in your life when you felt tired, discouraged, or overwhelmed. Maybe you were carrying a heavy burden, facing a difficult situation, or simply worn out from life's demands. This verse reminds us that, in those times, we don't have to rely on our own strength. When we hope in God, He becomes our source of renewed energy. His strength fills the spaces where our own resources fall short, allowing us to keep going with a confidence and peace that defy understanding. Isaiah 40:31 isn't just about physical endurance, it's about spiritual and emotional renewal. Our spirits, much like our bodies, grow weary over time, especially when we're faced with repeated challenges. But when we turn to God, He renews us from the inside out. This renewal goes beyond simply feeling better or recharged. It's a profound shift that brings us into alignment with God's purpose, refocusing our perspective and giving us a sense of purpose that motivates us to keep going. The promise of renewal is also a call to trust in God's timing. Eagles don't force themselves to fly on their own. They wait for the right wind to lift them. In the same way, we are called to wait on God, trusting that He will provide exactly what we need at the right moment. Waiting on the Lord requires patience, but it also requires an active faith, a readiness to respond when He moves. This waiting isn't passive. It's a time of preparation, of strengthening our faith as we trust in His faithfulness. Consider the people in the Bible who found renewed strength in God. Moses, after years of leading the Israelites through the wilderness, often turned to God for renewed strength and guidance. The Apostle Paul, despite enduring countless trials, found the endurance to continue his ministry because he placed his hope in God. These figures remind us that God's strength is available to us, not just in extraordinary moments, but in the daily challenges we all face. This verse is a powerful reminder that God's strength is infinite and available to us at all times. It's an invitation to release our anxieties, our fears, and our need to control, and to lean fully into God's love and power. When we trust Him and place our hope in Him, He doesn't just give us enough strength to get by. He gives us an abundance of strength to soar, to rise above our struggles, and to walk with confidence, knowing He is with us. So when you find yourself feeling worn out, remember Isaiah 40:31. Choose to hope in the Lord, to wait on His timing, and to trust that He will renew your strength. He will lift you as on eagle's wings, allowing you to walk, run, and even soar above whatever challenges come your way. Let this promise encourage you to lean on God daily, for His strength will sustain you, empower you, and carry you forward now and always. Number 10. Psalm chapter 34, verse 18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18 is a powerful reminder of God's compassion and closeness, especially during our lowest moments. This verse speaks directly to anyone who feels brokenhearted, overwhelmed, or crushed by life's difficulties. It tells us that, even in our deepest pain, God draws near. He doesn't stand distant from our suffering. Instead, He approaches us with comfort and healing. The phrase broken-hearted describes the emotional and spiritual wounds that can weigh heavily on us. Whether it's from loss, disappointment, betrayal, or any deep hurt, the broken heart can leave us feeling shattered and without direction. In these moments, it's easy to feel abandoned, as if no one truly understands the depth of our pain. But this verse reassures us that God not only understands our suffering, but He is present in it. He is close to us, providing a sense of companionship and comfort that is unlike anything the world can offer. The verse goes on to say that God saves those who are crushed in spirit. Being crushed in spirit refers to a state of despair, when our strength feels depleted and we can't find the motivation to move forward. This isn't just a moment of sadness, it's a feeling of being weighed down by life itself. Yet even in these moments of despair, God's saving power is at work. He doesn't simply watch us struggle, He intervenes, bringing salvation, hope, and restoration to our lives. Throughout the Bible, we see countless examples of God's compassion toward the brokenhearted. One of the most touching stories is that of Hannah in 1 Samuel. Hannah was deeply grieved by her inability to have children. She poured out her pain before the Lord, weeping in desperation. Yet God was not distant from her suffering. He saw her broken heart, and He answered her prayers, blessing her with a son, Samuel. Hannah's story reminds us that God listens to the cries of the brokenhearted and is moved by our pain. The beauty of Psalm 34:18 is that it doesn't promise the absence of pain. Instead, it promises God's presence in our pain. While we may wish to avoid hardship, this verse invites us to see our brokenness as a place where we can experience God's closeness and compassion in profound ways. He comes near to us in our weakest moments, offering strength, comfort, and a love that transcends all understanding. In our own lives, we often face situations that leave us feeling heartbroken or spiritually exhausted. These may be losses, disappointments, or circumstances we never anticipated. During these times, it's natural to question why we have to endure such pain, or even to feel as though God is far away. But Psalm 34:18 challenges this perspective, reminding us that God is closest to us when we are at our lowest. He is right there, ready to heal and restore us if we open our hearts to His presence. God's closeness to the brokenhearted is also a call for us to lean on Him and trust in His ability to heal. Healing from a broken heart or a crushed spirit often takes time, and the process can be difficult. But when we invite God into our pain, allowing Him to comfort and guide us, we discover a peace that goes beyond the temporary relief we might seek elsewhere. His presence fills the emptiness, and His love brings healing to the deepest wounds. Consider moments in your life when you felt broken-hearted or crushed in spirit. Perhaps it was a time of loss, a failed relationship, a setback, or a season of loneliness. Think back to how God was present in that moment, whether through the comfort of His word, the support of loved ones, or even the quiet sense of peace that seemed to come out of nowhere. Psalm 34:18 assures us that God was with you then, and He is with you now, ready to bring healing and hope. This verse is also a reminder to seek God's presence intentionally when we are hurting. It's easy to turn to distractions or temporary comforts when we're in pain, but God invites us to come to Him, to let Him be our comforter and healer. He doesn't just offer a quick fix. He offers lasting peace, a deep sense of belonging, and a reassurance that no matter how broken we may feel, He can restore us. Psalm 34:18 encourages us to trust that our brokenness is not the end of our story. God specializes in restoration and redemption. He takes our pain and over time brings beauty from it. We may not always understand why we go through certain hardships, but we can trust that God is present and working in the midst of them. So if you are feeling broken-hearted or crushed in spirit today, hold on to this promise. God is close to you. He sees every tear, hears every sigh, and understands every pain. Allow Him to be your comfort, your healer, and your strength. In His presence, you will find a peace that sustains you and a love that never leaves. Number 11, Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This invitation from Jesus is one of the most comforting and loving calls in all of Scripture. He speaks directly to those who feel tired, overwhelmed, and weighed down by the burdens of life. Jesus doesn't simply acknowledge our struggles. He offers a solution, a rest that goes beyond physical relief to the very depths of our souls. This verse is an open call to come to Him, to surrender our burdens, and to experience the rest and peace that only He can provide. The words weary and burdened capture feelings that many of us are all too familiar with. Life's demands can often leave us feeling worn out, whether it's due to the pressures of work, family responsibilities, personal challenges, or spiritual struggles. But Jesus sees us in our exhaustion and offers a way out, not by removing every challenge, but by giving us a source of strength and peace that allows us to carry on with renewed hope. When Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you," He is inviting us to join with Him in a way that transforms our burdens. In ancient times, a yoke was a wooden frame used to connect two animals, often oxen, so they could share the weight of a load. By offering His yoke, Jesus is inviting us to walk alongside Him, to let Him bear the weight of our struggles. He doesn't call us to face life's challenges alone. Instead, He invites us into a partnership where He does the heavy lifting. This is why He says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus' invitation to learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, reveals much about His character. In a world that often values strength, ambition, and self-reliance, Jesus offers a different path. He invites us to learn gentleness and humility, qualities that open the door to true peace and rest. When we are gentle and humble, we stop striving to prove ourselves or carry burdens that are not ours to bear. Instead, we find comfort and security in knowing that our value and worth are secure in God's love. This passage doesn't promise a life free of challenges or difficulties. Rather, it assures us that we don't have to bear our struggles alone. Jesus' offer of rest is not a temporary fix, but a lasting peace that renews us from the inside out. His yoke is easy, not because life will always be easy, but because His presence lightens our load. He gives us strength in our weakness, courage in our fears, and peace that sustains us in every season. Think about a time in your life when you felt truly weary or overwhelmed, maybe facing a challenge that seemed too heavy to carry. Perhaps it was during a period of personal loss, a demanding season at work, or a time when you felt distant from God. Jesus' invitation to come to me speaks directly to those moments. He doesn't expect us to be strong all the time. Instead, He encourages us to come to Him as we are, tired, burdened, and in need of rest. In taking His yoke, we're not called to abandon our responsibilities, but rather to release the weight of our burdens to Jesus. We're invited to trust that He is with us, guiding us and helping us carry the load. This is a radical shift in perspective, one that allows us to live in peace, even when life feels chaotic. With Jesus, we are no longer carrying our burdens in our own strength. We are walking in step with the One who knows us completely and loves us deeply. Jesus' invitation is an ongoing call to bring our weariness to Him daily. The rest He offers isn't a one-time gift. It's a continual source of renewal and strength. By regularly coming to Him, we find that His presence transforms our weariness into peace and our anxiety into trust. In His care, we discover a rhythm of grace, a way of living that is less about striving and more about trusting. The peace that Jesus offers is profound because it doesn't depend on circumstances. It's a rest that can coexist with responsibilities and challenges, a rest that allows us to navigate life's ups and downs with a steady heart. In Him, we find the balance of carrying what we must without letting it overwhelm us, because we are yoked to the One who is all-powerful and ever-compassionate. If you're feeling burdened today, consider accepting Jesus' invitation. Come to me. He's offering a rest that goes deeper than sleep or relaxation, a rest that reaches the soul. Lay your worries, your stresses, and your fears at His feet, and let Him give you the peace that surpasses understanding. Let His yoke lighten your load, and learn from His gentle and humble heart. In Jesus, we find the strength to keep going, the peace that calms our fears, and the assurance that we are never alone. His yoke is indeed easy, and His burden light, because He carries us through every season, offering a rest that renews our spirit, lifts our heart, and restores our soul. Number 12, Romans chapter 5, verses 3 to 5. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. In this passage, Paul teaches us a challenging yet transformative truth about suffering. Rather than viewing trials as obstacles or punishments, he sees them as catalysts for growth and transformation. Paul encourages us to glory in our sufferings, not because pain is inherently good, but because of the strength and character that God builds within us through these experiences. This verse shifts our perspective on hardship, showing us that suffering, when approached with faith, can lead us closer to God's purpose. The progression Paul describes, suffering to perseverance, perseverance to character, and character to hope, outlines a spiritual journey that begins in difficulty, but culminates in hope. First, suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance is the ability to endure, to keep moving forward even when circumstances are hard. In a world that often prioritizes immediate comfort and instant gratification, perseverance is a quality that deepens our faith. Through perseverance, we learn to trust God even when the path is unclear and when the outcome isn't guaranteed. This perseverance then builds character. Character here refers to a maturity in our faith, a strength that is refined through life's challenges. It is through facing difficulties and refusing to give up that we develop a resilient and authentic faith. When we endure trials with a spirit of perseverance, we begin to cultivate a character that reflects God's own strength and patience. We become people who are not easily shaken by the ups and downs of life because our foundation is grounded in something greater than ourselves. Finally, character leads to hope. This hope is not a vague wish or a fleeting feeling, but a steadfast assurance rooted in the promises of God. By enduring suffering and allowing God to shape us through it, we arrive at a hope that is unshakable. This hope isn't based on circumstances or fleeting success. It's grounded in the love of God and the work He is doing within us. Paul assures us that this hope does not put us to shame, because it's backed by God's love, a love so profound that He has poured it into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. This love acts as both a foundation and a constant reminder that God is with us, even in our darkest hours. Consider the lives of people in the Bible who walked this path from suffering to hope. Job, who lost everything, found hope in his perseverance and faithfulness to God. Joseph, sold into slavery and imprisoned unjustly, saw his trials transform his character and ultimately lead to the fulfillment of God's promises for his life. These stories remind us that suffering doesn't have the final word. God uses it to bring about a deeper purpose and a lasting hope. In our own lives, we encounter moments of suffering and challenges that test our limits. It could be a health issue, a broken relationship, financial struggles, or spiritual dryness. These experiences can leave us feeling discouraged or alone, yet Romans 5:3-5 tells us that they are part of a divine process. When we trust God through these hardships, He transforms them into stepping stones toward a stronger faith. Suffering becomes an opportunity for God's grace to work in us, building resilience and drawing us closer to Him. This passage also teaches us that hope does not disappoint because it is rooted in God's love. This is a hope that withstands disappointments, a hope that doesn't fade when things don't go as planned. When we are filled with God's love through the Holy Spirit, we are able to face life's challenges with courage and faith. We know that our pain is not wasted and that God's love is ever present, guiding us through every storm. Think about a time in your life when you faced a difficulty that seemed overwhelming. Maybe it felt like there was no clear way forward, or perhaps the weight of the situation made it hard to see anything positive. Yet, looking back, perhaps you can see how that experience strengthened you, how it taught you to rely on God, or how it ultimately deepened your hope. This journey from suffering to perseverance, from perseverance to character, and from character to hope is one that God walks with us every step of the way. Paul's words challenge us to redefine how we view suffering. Instead of seeing it as a setback, we can view it as part of God's refining process. Suffering, while painful, becomes a path that leads to a greater resilience, a deeper character, and a hope that cannot be shaken. When we embrace this perspective, we find that our faith grows stronger, our love for God deepens, and we are better equipped to face the challenges of life with unwavering hope. So, when you encounter trials, remember Romans 5:3-5. Let this passage remind you that suffering, though difficult, is not in vain. God is at work in you, building a perseverance that will produce character and ultimately a hope that endures. This hope will not disappoint, for it is rooted in the love of God that fills our hearts through the Holy Spirit. Embrace this truth and allow God to use every experience to draw you closer to Him and to mold you into who He created you to be. Number 13, John chapter 16, verse 33. I have told you these things, so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. This verse from the Gospel of John contains one of Jesus' most comforting promises. It's a message of both realism and hope, as Jesus acknowledges the reality of hardship in our lives, but also assures us of His victory over every challenge we may face. Jesus understands that in this life we will encounter pain, loss, and difficulties, but even as He speaks about trouble, He calls us to take heart, because He has overcome the world. The phrase, "in this world you will have trouble," is a reminder that challenges are a natural part of our human experience. Jesus doesn't promise a life without struggle. Rather, He prepares us for it, letting us know that hardship is to be expected. This perspective is important because it helps us avoid feelings of isolation when trials come our way. When we face loss, disappointment, or adversity, we can remember that even Jesus anticipated these moments in our lives. Hardship doesn't mean that God has abandoned us or that we're doing something wrong. It's simply part of life. Yet the heart of this verse lies in Jesus' assurance. But take heart, I have overcome the world. These words are filled with power and hope. Jesus is inviting us to shift our focus from our circumstances to His victory. By saying, I have overcome the world, He is declaring that nothing in this world is beyond His authority or power. Every challenge, every obstacle, every source of fear or worry is ultimately under His control. This doesn't mean our difficulties will magically disappear, but it does mean that we can face them with courage, knowing that Jesus has already triumphed over everything we might fear. Jesus' victory over the world means that we don't have to face our struggles alone. He has already endured suffering, rejection, and even death, and has risen victorious. His experience gives him a profound understanding of our pain, and his victory assures us that there is a way through every trial. Jesus isn't just sympathizing with our struggles, he is actively guiding us through them, providing strength, comfort, and a peace that the world cannot give. The phrase, "In me you may have peace," is central to this promise. Jesus is inviting us to find our peace in him rather than in our circumstances. Worldly peace is often temporary, based on situations that can change quickly. But the peace Jesus offers is constant and unshakable because it is rooted in his eternal love and authority. When we draw close to him, we find a peace that doesn't depend on the absence of trouble, but on his presence in the midst of it. This peace gives us the strength to keep going, to face each day with hope, and to trust that God is in control. Reflect on moments in your life when you faced significant challenges. Perhaps there were times when you felt overwhelmed, uncertain, or even afraid. Yet, looking back, you may recognize how Jesus was with you, helping you through each struggle, offering peace in unexpected ways. This verse invites us to remember that same presence and power in every challenge we face today and in the future. The victory Jesus speaks of is also a reminder of our eternal hope. His triumph over the world isn't just for our present struggles. It's a promise of a future where pain and suffering will be no more. In the book of Revelation, we are reminded that God will wipe away every tear and that death, sorrow, and pain will pass away. Jesus' victory assures us that no matter how difficult life may be now, our ultimate future is secure in him. Take heart. These words challenge us to respond to life's trials with courage and hope. Jesus is calling us to stand firm, to trust that his strength is enough for whatever we face. This doesn't mean we won't feel pain or experience fear, but it means we can confront these feelings with confidence in his power. Taking heart is an act of faith, choosing to believe in Jesus' victory even when we can't see how things will work out. When we internalize this promise, our perspective on life's challenges changes. Instead of viewing them as obstacles that threaten to defeat us, we see them as opportunities to experience Jesus' strength and peace. We learn to rely on him more deeply, to draw closer to his love, and to find our rest in the assurance that he has overcome the world. So when you face trouble, remember John 16:33. Let this verse remind you that peace is possible, not because life is easy, but because Jesus is with you. Lean into his presence, take courage in his victory, and hold fast to the hope that he offers. No matter how difficult the journey, Jesus has already conquered every obstacle. In him, you can find the strength to endure, the peace that sustains, and the assurance that your struggles are not the end. His victory is your victory, and in that promise, you can take heart and find unshakable hope. Number 14, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. In this brief yet powerful verse, Peter extends an invitation that speaks to every person weighed down by worry, stress, or anxiety. Rather than urging us to simply deal with it or push through, Peter encourages us to take all of our anxieties, all our fears, worries, and burdens, and to give them to God. This invitation is not just a suggestion, it is a directive to place our trust in God's loving care. The word cast implies a deliberate act of throwing something away from ourselves. It's not a gentle handover, but an intentional act of releasing, of letting go completely. When we cast our anxieties on God, we're surrendering our concerns to him and choosing not to carry those burdens ourselves. This requires humility and faith, as it means acknowledging that there are things beyond our control and that only God is truly capable of bearing them. In a world that often tells us to be self-reliant and handle our problems independently, this act of casting our anxieties on God might feel countercultural or even uncomfortable. But it's precisely when we let go of the need to manage everything on our own that we find peace. God's invitation here is not just about relinquishing control. It's about discovering the relief that comes from trusting Him fully. He is inviting us to experience a life where we don't have to bear the weight of every worry alone. This verse also reveals something profound about God's character, because He cares for you. God's care for us isn't distant or passive. It's active and deeply personal. He isn't indifferent to our struggles or dismissive of our fears. His care is the reason we can safely lay down our burdens at His feet. He is a loving Father who understands every thought, every concern, and every silent fear we carry. This is why we can trust Him with every anxiety, because we know that His love for us is infinite and His compassion is unfailing. Throughout Scripture, we see examples of God's care for His people, particularly in times of distress. One beautiful example is found in the story of Elijah, the prophet who, after a time of great victory, found himself exhausted, discouraged, and fearful. He fled into the wilderness, feeling completely overwhelmed. But God didn't rebuke him or tell him to get it together. Instead, God provided rest, food, and comfort for Elijah, meeting him in his moment of need. This story reminds us that God cares not only about our victories, but also about our moments of weakness and fear. In our own lives, casting our anxieties on God may mean taking intentional steps to bring our worries to Him in prayer, laying out our concerns openly and honestly before Him. Sometimes we may feel that our worries are too small to bring to God, or that they're insignificant in the larger scheme of things. But this verse reassures us that God cares for us on a personal level. No anxiety is too small. No fear is too insignificant for Him. He invites us to bring everything to Him because He genuinely cares. Reflect on moments when worry or stress has felt overwhelming in your life. Perhaps there were situations that seemed beyond your ability to handle, times when anxiety kept you awake at night or made you feel helpless. This verse offers a way forward. Instead of letting anxiety take root in your heart, God invites you to release it into His hands. He wants you to experience the freedom and peace that come from trusting Him with your concerns. To cast our anxieties on God also requires that we actively practice faith. It's one thing to say we trust God, but it's another to release our worries to Him entirely. This process might mean praying and surrendering the same concern multiple times, reminding ourselves that God is more than capable of handling it. Over time, as we make this a habit, we begin to see how God's presence can replace our anxiety with peace, as His care and compassion fill the spaces where fear once lived. This verse also serves as a reminder that God's invitation to cast our burdens on Him is a daily one. Life constantly presents us with new worries, new uncertainties, and new challenges, but God's promise of care never wavers. Each day we can come to Him anew, casting our anxieties on Him and trusting that He is with us in every situation, working for our good and holding us in His love. If you're feeling anxious or burdened today, remember this promise from 1 Peter. Take a moment to pause and bring your worries to God. Speak to Him honestly, share the fears and concerns that weigh on your heart, and consciously place them in His hands. Remind yourself that God's love is constant, that His compassion is boundless, and that He is actively involved in your life. Allow this verse to shape your perspective on anxiety and worry. Let it be a source of comfort, knowing that God invites you to bring everything to Him, not because He demands it, but because He cares for you deeply. He is your strength, your peace, and your place of rest. Embrace His invitation, cast your anxieties upon Him, and find peace in the assurance that you are loved, seen, and cared for by a faithful and compassionate God. Number 15. Psalm chapter 126, verse 5. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Psalm 126:5 is a powerful reminder of the transformative nature of God's promises. It offers hope for those who are enduring seasons of hardship and sorrow, assuring them that their tears are not wasted and that God will bring about a harvest of joy in His perfect timing. This verse calls us to trust in a process that may be painful, but will ultimately lead to a deep, abiding joy that only God can provide. The image of sowing with tears captures the reality of human suffering. Just as farmers plant seeds in the ground with hope for a future harvest, we often move through difficult seasons by faith, planting seeds of prayer, perseverance, and trust in God, even when we're overcome with sorrow. The act of sowing with tears isn't easy. It takes courage to keep going when the outcome isn't visible and the weight of life's struggles feels overwhelming. Yet this verse encourages us to continue sowing, even through our tears, with the assurance that God sees our faithfulness and that our sorrow will eventually give way to joy. Consider how seasons of hardship often involve a process of growth and transformation, even if we don't see it immediately. When we're in the midst of a painful season, it's easy to feel as if our efforts and prayers are in vain. We may wonder if God hears us or if anything good will come from our struggles. But Psalm 126:5 invites us to trust that God is working beneath the surface, even when we can't see it. Just as seeds take time to grow and bear fruit, our faith-filled actions and prayers will yield a harvest in God's perfect timing. The promise of reaping with songs of joy is a beautiful reminder that sorrow doesn't have the final word. God promises that our seasons of struggle and tears will ultimately lead to joy, a joy that is deeply rooted in His faithfulness. This isn't a shallow happiness that fades with circumstances, but a profound joy that comes from seeing God's hand at work, even through the most challenging times. It's the joy of witnessing how God can bring beauty from ashes and turn our mourning into dancing. In the Bible, we see this theme of sorrow turning to joy echoed time and time again. One of the most powerful examples is the story of Joseph. Betrayed by his own brothers and sold into slavery, Joseph endured years of hardship, imprisonment, and uncertainty. Despite the tears he surely shed, he remained faithful to God, continuing to sow with integrity and trust. In the end, God elevated Joseph to a position of authority in Egypt, where he was able to save many lives during a famine, including those of his family. Reflecting on his journey, Joseph could see how God had transformed his suffering into something meaningful and beautiful, fulfilling the promise of turning sorrow into joy. In our lives, we may not always understand why we go through certain hardships. We may not see the purpose in our pain or the results of our faithful sowing right away. Yet, this verse encourages us to keep moving forward, to continue sowing seeds of faith, love, kindness, and trust, even when it's difficult. God's promise to bring a harvest of joy assures us that our struggles are not in vain. Sowing with tears also involves a form of surrender, a willingness to let go of our own understanding and trust God's process. We may not know how or when the joy will come, but we can rest in the knowledge that God is faithful to fulfill His promises. Our tears, rather than being a sign of weakness, become part of the very process through which God brings about growth and renewal in our lives. Reflect on a time in your life when you went through a season of sowing with tears. Perhaps it was a time of personal loss, disappointment, or uncertainty. Looking back, you may now see glimpses of how God used that period to strengthen your faith, deepen your character, or bring about blessings that you couldn't have anticipated. These experiences remind us that God is always at work, even in our most difficult seasons, and that His promise to turn sorrow into joy is true. Psalm 126:5 is also a reminder to approach our hardships with hope. While we may feel weighed down by current struggles, God calls us to look forward to the harvest that is to come. Our tears are not the end of our story. They are part of a process that leads to something greater. God sees every tear, hears every prayer, and honors every act of faith, no matter how small it may seem. If you're in a season of sorrow or hardship, take heart in this promise. Continue to sow with faith, even when it feels like all you have are tears. Trust that God is with you, working behind the scenes, and that He will bring about a time of rejoicing. The joy that comes after a season of tears is often deeper and more meaningful because it has been shaped by God's faithful presence through our pain. So hold on to this promise from Psalm 126:5. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Let it remind you that your sorrow is temporary, that God is working in your life, and that a time of joy is on the horizon. In His time, He will turn your tears into a beautiful harvest of joy and fulfillment, revealing the depth of His love and faithfulness.